Welcome back, China World Report viewers. It's always a distinct pleasure to have Mr. Lawrence Pih having a chat with us. Unfortunately, usually it's about very serious matters, but fortunately, he has great insights and experience in geopolitics and macroeconomics. We've had him here before. We know that his opinion is always very precise and wise. And I'd like to welcome you back, Mr. Lawrence. It's been a few months, but it's always a pleasure to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Telo. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
So I'd like to get things rolling. The Iran situation is worrying the world as a whole. I know that you are personally very worried about what's going on, and I'd like to kick things off by asking you if you could walk us through the historical trajectory of how things got to where they are to this current conflict.
Certainly. I'm going to breeze through a little bit of the religious history also, how we got here. So, from the religious aspect, Judaism has been around for 3,000 years, Christianity for over 2,000 years, and Islam for about 1,400 years. So, Judaism was the first religion. And let's look at the three Abrahamic religions, as the construction of the narrative. Let's assume that it's a huge canvas. So Judaism came first, and they wrote down what they believe is the religious truth. And since they were the first ones to come around, they probably occupied about 60% of this canvas. And then Christianity came. And we could say that the Christianity occupied about 30% of the canvas. And the last religion that came was Islam, and what was left was about 10%. So the greatest amount of narrative was constructed by Judaism, and then Christianity, and then Islam. So it all started from the message received by Abraham from God. And during this message, God gave Israel the land of Israel. And the land of Israel is something sacred in Judaism. And also, they were the chosen people. So they had a status that's different from other religions and other people, and also the non-Abrahamic religion believers of other religions of Asia and other parts of the world. So you have a construct of Judeo-Christianity, basically, in that region. And from then on, the land of Israel is a sacred gift from God. And the Israel government and Israel as a country understands that this land goes from the Nile to the Euphrates, such a huge plot of real estate. And the problem is that, of course, today they are Palestinians in the same region that is comprised of supposedly the land given to Israel by God. Now, if you are not a Christian, not a Jew, and you are a Muslim, you may find that this gift of God is a little strange. And you may not accept the fact that God gave all this land to Israel. So the problem is seniority. The Jews came first, and then the Christians and the Muslims. The problem is that the Muslim population grew much faster than the Jewish people. So they occupied land that are holy to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which is Jerusalem. And here is where the problem rises. It's all a territorial problem in the beginning, backed by religious truth. And you can accept the religious truth of Israel or the Christians or the Muslims. The problem is there are conflicting interests. They have conflicting interests in territorial interests in what usually called the Middle East. Actually, it is West Asia. And here we have a problem. Today, these areas are contested. And it is basically a territorial dispute also, but also a power dispute. So from a religious point of view, it came all the way through the years, actually centuries, of contest between the three religions. For the Muslims, the three holy places are Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. For the Christians, it's Jerusalem. For the Jews, it's Jerusalem. So you have a serious problem here. And again, as I repeat, it's a territorial problem of who gets to control the Holy Land. So from a religious point of view, it all started from a supposed gift by God to the Jews. And if you go a little forward, actually, they were only Jews. Jesus was Jewish. So Jesus was Jewish, but he was the main force behind Christianity. And Christianity, the Old Testament, is a perfect replica of the Jewish holy book, which is the Torah. So we can say that Christianity is a branch of Judaism, but Islam is different. The Quran, which has some similarities with the Torah and the Old Testament. And even the Old Testament was revised to the New Testament. So we can say that Christianity is a branch of Judaism, an offshoot of Judaism. This is extremely complex because faith is something that is not subject to logic. Either you believe or you don't believe. It is never empirically verifiable. Therefore, if you have faith, then you believe it is the truth, even though it's not secular truth, but it's religious truth. And it is very, very powerful. So much so that you have 2.2 billion Muslims today and about 2.4 billion Christians, more than half the world of these two religions. Of course, the Jewish religion has much less Jews. I think it's about 20 million only. But that's another story, why there are so few Jews in the world today. So here we are. Now let's get to fast forward to about the early 20th century, 1910, 1913. Iran, in Iran was discovered oil. And the British were the most important world power at that juncture of history. Was still the era of the sun never sets in Great Britain. So they had enormous influence, in particular in this region also. And the discovery of oil was important in light of the First World War and obviously later the Second World War. But as you remember, the First World War started in 1914. And the British had a important role in Iran. And so in it was formed a company. It was called the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which today is the British Petroleum. And that company controlled basically the oil wealth of Iran. And due to the fact that Iran has such an enormous reserve of oil was discovered in Iran, it became a target of interest of powerful countries. Basically, at that juncture, it was Great Britain. So what happened? In 1953, an elected leader of Iran, his name was Mossadegh. And in 1953, he was removed, despite the fact that he was elected by the Iranian parliament and appointed by the Shah. So his legitimacy cannot be disputed. Then, with the support of UK and US, the UK, through the operatives of MI6 and the US CIA operatives engineered a coup against Mossadegh in 1953 and was overthrown. And he was installed, he was replaced by Mohammad Reza Pahlavi in 79. And Pahlavi ruled until 1979 when he was removed. He was removed by a religious leader, and his name is Khomeini, Ali Khomeini. So from 1979 on, the removal of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, you had in Iran it became a theocracy. Khomeini already had a tight relationship with IRGC, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, because he was the founder of this military organization. In the beginning, IRGC focused only on the military aspect and security. And he obviously had tight relationship because he was the founder. Afterwards, when Khomeini died in 1989, he was succeeded by Ali Khamenei. Khamenei had even closer ties with IRGC. So as time went by, became more and more linked to the military organization. And from then on, our IRGC became not only a military institution, but had also control of the politics in Iran. And after Khomeini was assassinated recently, his son, who was injured also during the attack, Murtaba Khomeini, he has even tighter relationship with IRGC. So now IRGC not only is the military institution, but political, and also voices their opinion and also their guidance in foreign relations. So as time went by, it is ironic, but Iran became more and more radical. With each government became more radical. This is also as a result of all these sanctions, and we can talk about
Yeah.
that later, that happened to Iran. Iran is not an Arab country. It is the succession of the Persian Empire, which has been around for almost 5,000 years. 90% of Iran is Shia Muslims, or they identify themselves as Shia Muslims. Of this Iranian population, over 60% are Persians, and about 18% they are Azerbaijanis, and 10% Kurds, and the rest of other ethnicity. So basically, Iran is a Shia country and a great majority of Persians. Persians are not Arabs. Their culture is different. They are the result of a legacy of a 5,000-year civilization. So we have to put this into context, because you cannot bunch Iran together with other Arab countries. It's a whole different country. And so here we are. I would say that the oil that was discovered in Iran is what I would call a curse disguised as a blessing. If Iran did not have oil, the great powers will not be so interested in Iran. And the coups that were engineered by the US and particularly Great Britain might never have occurred. We have to be very careful to try to understand Iran. Iranians are very intelligent people. For your information, in the international IQ test, which is one way of gauging intelligence of a population, although it's not the only one, and it may not even be the best. But according to the international IQ test, which had 1.2 million participants, Iran ranks fourth.
Impressive.
According to this study, South Korea is the first, China is second, Japan is third, and Iran is fourth. So, with a civilization of 5,000 years, with a population that is highly educated, and according to international IQ tests, highly intelligent, you can expect great things from Iran. So, with this background, Iran stands out in West Asia. And Iran, if it were not for interference of other powers, today would be a great power. And I might even venture to guess that the Iranian economy may be close to what Japan is today, because Iran has 92 to 93 million population. So unfortunately, they had oil. And as I said, oil is a curse disguised as a blessing.
I think
And here
many
we
Arab
are.
countries can say that.
Exactly. Exactly. And here we are with the chaos in the West Asia, with Israel wanting to realize its territorial wish, which according to them was given to them by God, and the message was through Abraham. So many will question Israel's right to land from the Nile to Euphrates. Why did God give the land to Israel? Why are the Israelis or the Jews the chosen people? No? Then you go into a sphere, a domain that's very sensitive because religion. You can construct any reality from religious truth. What happens if the religious truth of another religion contradicts and challenges your religious truth? So here we are. Basically, it is a struggle for control and dominance over West Asia, particularly the Gulf states. And Italo, unfortunately, here's where we are.
Yeah, worrying times, as you said, and also granted, being a majority Shia country surrounded by majority Sunni countries as well, I think might play into that. And thank you for this just historical background and explanation as to how we got here. And to follow up on that, I'd like to ask you if you think how much of this conflict, taking into account the historical perspective, how much of this conflict do you think is really driven by security concerns or by broader geopolitical and economic interests by, all the parties involved?
I think that it's driven by all those.
Mhm.
Basically, what we have in West Asia is a fight for control and preeminence and hegemony in the region. But there are three important countries in the West Asia today. They are Iran, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. These are the main players. And Iraq plays a more secondary role. The rest are not that relevant. So, to realize the biblical truth, Israel wants the land. They want a great Israel. So it is understandable why they want to annex part of Jordan. They want Gaza. They want to move to part of Syria. And but it's interesting because the Israel has 10 million people, of which 2 million are Arabs. They obviously don't have the full rights that the Jews have, but they live in Israel. You know? So essentially what he's saying is that a 8 million population wants to dominate a region with 350 million Arabs. Now that's the challenge of tall order, you know. And the reason why Israel um, can have this aspiration is because of the unconditional support of the United States of America. And here we go into a whole different story of the support of Israel by the United States of America and the Jewish diaspora in the States, which, by the way, the Jewish population in the United States is only second to Israel. There are about probably 7 million Jews in the United States of America, which makes it the largest diaspora of Jewish population outside. And they are extremely successful financially. And since they're so successful, and they obviously want to support Israel, there's a lobby called AIPAC, which funds politicians across the party line, which Democrats or Republicans. And due to a system that you essentially can buy political power through the AIPAC and the very strange way of financing campaigns, which is super PAC, there's no limit to the amount of funding. So money becomes an important aspect. With the Jewish lobby, their influence in Washington is enormous. So essentially, regarding West Asia foreign policy, U.S. policy of West Asia, um, Israel dictates what U.S. should do, essentially. So, so long as the unconditional support of U.S. for Israel, Israel will continue to be able to be a dominant and no, perhaps not dominant, but preeminent, most likely, power in West Asia. What's happening now is that the Americans went to war again against Iran. This is the second time. First time was mid 2025, and the Israelis, Israel and U.S. attacked Iran during the negotiation, in the middle of the negotiation, and did the same thing again in February. So there's obviously lack of trust. Um, the negotiations will be difficult because U.S. has their demands and Iran has their demands, and it's not easy to reconcile the both parties. And along the negotiation, we must factor into Israel's interest also. And at some point, Israel and U.S. interests may not align, you know, and that will depend on how influential is the Jewish lobby in United States of America, and to see how U.S. is willing to accommodate Israeli interests, even though it's not specifically U.S. interests.
Yeah, that's a very good point. At some point, they will, I think, naturally diverge. Israeli interest versus the American interest. And I'd like to ask you if you think, we mentioned we talked about sanctions in the beginning, and we said we could touch back on it at a later point. So I'd like to bring that up again. Do you think sanctions pressure governments effectively, or do they end up hurting populations more than the policymakers themselves?
The sanctions, Italo, is an instrument to build regime change. So if you want a regime change, you bring pain and suffering to the population, and you expect that at some point the population will be so revolted against the government, even though they realize that the government is not a cause, but it's external. They decided that a change is needed. Um, we have seen that regime change efforts really succeed, if ever succeed in the past. You can see other countries like Libya, Iran, uh, for I think over 40 years, Iraq, North Korea, Cuba, you have not succeeded, and it's unlikely to succeed. Regime change can only be successful if the power that is trying to orchestrate the regime change puts boots on the ground in huge amount. For an estimate of how many US military personnel is needed for regime change in Iran, their estimate that goes to 2 million troops, 2 million American troops in Iran to be able to topple the government.
Do you think that's ever going to happen? I mean, it seems
Well,
it's just
from a numerical
impossible.
point of view, it may be difficult, Italy, because US has at most 1 million military personnel, and they are spread all over the world. Because US has about 800 bases, military bases around the world. So it's all spread out. It's in Asia, it's in Europe, and some of it is, in fact, in West Asia. So it's very difficult, and I don't think that the Americans have stomach to send 2 million troops or even 1 million to Iran to topple the government because the number of casualties would be horrendous. And the ability to sustain hardship and pain to the Americans is much lower than Iran because Iran is fighting for its survival. It's an existential issue, whereas Iran is not a threat to the United States of America, but it is a threat to Israel. So United States of America is a country that's has a geographical location that's extraordinarily favorable. They're surrounded by Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, Canada, Mexico. So they have no risk of any country invading US. The only risk they have is missiles flying into the US. No. And so most people conclude that Iran is not a risk to the United States of America. But the alignment between the US and Israel leads to Americans to participate in a conflict, in any conflict that involves Israel, to support Israel against any West Asian country, and Iran being the most powerful country in the region. Israel wants to somehow degrade Iran's military power and economic power. But I would add that if Israel succeeds in neutralizing Iran, the next target is Turkey, which is very interesting because Turkey
Really?
is a
Wow.
NATO member. No?
Mm.
So we'll see how it plays out. Um, the Iranian war, the current Iranian war, has exposed some fragility of new US military power. Militarily, of course, the United States of America is so much more powerful than Iran. But we're not talking about normal warfare. We're talking about asymmetric warfare. And here, what's important is not how many aircraft carriers you have, or destroyers, or cruisers you have, or even planes. What's important is how many efficient drones you have, how many missiles you have. So it's a whole different way of conducting war. And Iranians have been preparing for many, many years. It seems almost that they were expecting at some point there would be a conflict with all the underground facilities that they've built, even manufacturing missiles and drones underground, not to mention that all the military equipment is hidden underground. And so the Americans, to their surprise, the Iranians have become much more resilient. But if they study history carefully and go through what I've said in the beginning, what is Iran, what constitute the Iranian DNA, they will understand that it was never going to be easy.
Yeah, certainly seems like they weren't. They were expecting that things would be a lot easier than they're actually being. And touching on that, you mentioned that Iran, I guess perhaps in conjunction with Israel, is the most powerful country in the region. So do you think that it's the leadership that Iran exerts over the region? We know they have, a lot of influence in countries like Lebanon. To what extent do you think Iran's leadership in the region is contributing to its own isolation versus being, shaped by external pressures? Considering, like I mentioned, the influence they exert over Lebanon, Syria, and other places as well, like Yemen.
Yeah, well, Iran has supported the Hezbollah in Lebanon. They have supported Houthis, and they have supported militias in Iraq. This is the whole, the comprehensive Iranian support that targets Israel. And this is the defense structure. So in any conflict against Israel, um, Israel will be fighting the Hezbollah in Jordan. Houthis will be hurling missiles against Israel and blocking all the commerce in the Red Sea. At the same time, Iraqi militia will attempt to disrupt the American base in Iraq. What has occurred in the 6 weeks war, or almost 2 months war now, is that the Iranians managed to destroy most of the US bases or render them inoperative because these bases do not have air defense systems sophisticated enough, such as the Iron Dome in Israel, the Iron Dome, the David Sling. So Israel is much better protected. Another problem is that the depletion of US military hardware, they are running out of missiles and defensive missiles. So they move part of the missiles that were stationed in Asia, basically South Korea and Japan, and they moved it to use against Iran in West Asia. After 4 years of war in Ukraine, the Americans basically supported Ukrainian military effort. This inventory of missiles, etc., were already running fairly low. And with this conflict now, it's according to some specialists, at critical levels now. So there's a timeline. How long can the US and Israel continue their war efforts? And also, how long can the Iranians continue the war effort? What has become very clear is that the issue of the Strait of Hormuz is causing havoc in world economy. And many US allies have suffered tremendously, like, for example, the Asian allies, Japan, South Korea, Philippines. Um, Japan is better prepared because they have huge amount of strategic oil reserves in the country. But that's not the case of Korea or Philippines and other countries that are aligned with the US. That's not to mention the huge damage that this war has caused to the Gulf states, basically Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, and particularly United Arab Emirates. Uh, so these countries are what we call collateral damage. Since they host US bases, and from these bases are launched missiles, even warplanes, to attack Iran, Iran has considered them as part of the war effort and has targeted their infrastructure, oil refineries, etc. So they're paying a huge, huge, huge price by hosting US bases. And they believe that the US military umbrella will shield them and will protect them. And they have come to the conclusion that this is not the case, as has the South Asian countries. Now, all these allies that are aligned to the US are beginning to question how reliable is the US when push comes to shove. No. And this is an issue that will lead to countries that were once very closely aligned with the US to begin to hedge. There are two ways of hedging. Closing relationship with US adversaries and build up their own military. And some countries are doing both. South Korea, for instance, will probably go around this route. And so now we have a situation where the credibility and the soft power of the US has been degraded significantly. There's even talk that going forward, the Chinese yuan will be more frequently used as a currency for oil trade. As we all know, the petrodollar was crucial to US attaining its status as world reserve currency. And it's being degraded. There are talks of other currencies. BRICS most certainly are looking at this very carefully of how they can push an alternative alternative means of payment other than the US dollar. So you have a degrading of the US dollar preeminence, which is an extraordinary privilege for the United States of America, because they can borrow cheaply and they can print, because US will never default in dollar loans because they can simply print. This is coming to be challenged now. If you look at the US debt, which is about $39.3 trillion, the Federal Reserve, federal debt, and you add that to the municipal or the local and state debt, it's over $42 trillion today. And that's about over 130% of GDP. And since the fact that the US deficit is anywhere between 1.5 trillion to 2 trillion yearly, the debt will increase at a very fast rate. Plus, interest rate today in the U.S. is much higher than the previous, let's say, 5 years ago or 4 years ago, even, where at some point you had negative real interest rate. So now the borrowing cost is higher for United States of America, and that will add additional pressure to the total debt because the debt's being financed at higher interest rate today than a few years ago. So from a monetary, from a military, and from a political point of view, this war has not been favorable for the United States of America. Many believe there was a mistake. And we should wait and see to see how it plays out. But I believe that negotiation won't be easy because it seems to me that Iran's determined not to back down. And with midterm elections coming, a little over 6 months from now, the Republican Party has expressed some concern of the ongoing war. Inflation's moving up. Oil is at $100, the Brent crude, but that's only paper oil, not physical oil, which is at $130, $140 a barrel, which is much higher. So all these are going to affect the inflation in America. The effect of oil across the economy hasn't been begun yet. The American consumer is only paying high prices at the gas, but soon they'll be paying high prices grocery and everything, because oil affects everything. The longer the war lasts, the worse it will get, not only for United States of America, for the whole world. Only countries that are self-sufficient in oil will stand to gain, and there are not that many countries.
Yeah.
Most are oil dependent. And even in these countries, when oil goes up, sometimes domestic oil prices also go up, which will affect the inflation. So all in all, it has been a very, very negative effect, this war on the U.S., its reputation, on Israel, Israel's reputation, the economies, global economy. So some even say that this can cause a crisis that's even worse than the 2008-09 great financial crisis. I don't know. I cannot tell,
Yeah, this.
but it certainly elicits concern.
Um, and so, why do you think that the Western media narratives on Iran are so consistent? Just the facts are shared, or even framed, basically all in the same way. When you look at media in Europe, perhaps even in South America, but certainly in the United States, it seems that there's just one straight line narrative about Iran, and Iran is bad, and they're finance terrorism, and they're the biggest financiers of terrorism, went through their proxies, etc. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's no any type of backlash, or at least any type of contesting of this narrative?
Well, I focus more on the U.S. media and UK media, and these two countries' media is essentially pro-Israel due to the amount of political clout that Israel has in these countries. So it's not surprising. And you have to remember that mainstream media are profit-oriented organizations. They are worried about their bottom line. So they have to align with the narrative of government. And the Israeli lobby is very efficient. Today, if you criticize Israel in UK or US, you can be called out as anti-Semitism, anti-Semitist, and all sort of labels. So it's understandable that the Western media will support Israel from a financial point of view, from a political point of view, because the narratives of the government are pro-Israel. You see many UK politicians condemning what's happening in Gaza? No. You see many American politicians condemning what's happening in Gaza? No. Um, and we know what's happening in Gaza. We know what the Israeli government does. We know the prisons and the life of prisoners in Israel are like. We know what the settlers do in the West Bank. We know all what Israel does because today it's difficult to hide what you do. Yet the Western media simply whitewashes reality. Here is what I challenge the concept that there's free speech in the Western world. There is no free speech. It's all, as Noam Chomsky rightly said, constructing consent. This is what it is. It's the bottom line, it's the political influence, it's the media that needs to align themselves with government policies. And this is why today, very few people take seriously what comes out of Western mainstream media regarding Israel and Iran and other Arab countries that do not align with the Israeli policies. And you can expect this to continue. But due to the war that Israel and the United States initiated against Iran, this is the second time around. I think that global sentiment has shifted, in my opinion, not only from the aspect that they are beginning to hedge, because the question of reliability and the credibility of the U.S. military support. And they are also seeing that the dollar is being eroded. The de-dollarization is a process, is ongoing and may accelerate. So in the end, though, we have to understand that it is not only a unconditional support of Israel due to U.S. action, it's also, they also have China as an objective, direct or indirect. So supporting Israel is important, but they will never disregard what they see as a threat from China.
I'm very glad you mentioned that because we touched on that briefly, a few minutes ago, with the degradation of U.S. credibility and people, countries beginning to hedge their political objectives and their allies, basically. How do you see China? China seems to be taking a measured approach in the region. How do you interpret its role in relation to Iran itself and the broader conflict that we see going on geopolitically in the world that perhaps may involve Ukraine and other, I guess, proxy conflicts that are happening?
Yeah, well, China has been relatively silent insofar the Israeli-US war against Iran is concerned. But the Chinese leadership doesn't broadcast what they do. There's no doubt that the Chinese are supporting military effort in Iran, from fuels for missiles to drones to technology to supporting them with intelligence, allowing them to use the Baidu tracking system and continue buying Iranian oil until, of course, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz recently. So China has been supporting Iran. And for China, Iran's important. not only is a supplier of oil, but China has an agreement with Iran of a package of $400 billion. And I may also add that Russia is supporting Iran. So you have the second and a third military power supporting Iran, which is China and Russia, considering that US is the most powerful military in the world, which I have serious doubts. But anyway, let's assume this is true. So we're talking about the second and third military power supporting Iran. And without doubt, the largest economy, which is China, and I might add, by a large margin, is supporting Iran. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Of course, China doesn't want to disrupt totally their relationship with the US because China knows that they do need US as US needs China. Now, what would be interesting is to see if Mr. Trump will be going to Beijing in May for a summit with President Xi Jinping. And what will be the outcome of the agreement in this meeting? Yeah, this is very interesting to monitor, and we should all monitor it very carefully as to the outcome of this summit.
I think perhaps we already have our next or one of following interview topics to analyze post summit, see what comes out of it. And looking ahead, sir, do you think that unfortunately, are we looking at escalation, containment, or a gradual normalization of the situation, perhaps a stalemate? Is there a realistic path to peace? What do you personally expect that looking ahead is going to happen?
Yeah, it's always difficult to predict because the American leadership under Mr. Trump is very erratic. We never know what's going to happen. However, the facts on the ground indicates that he is eager to have a resolution to the war, and he wants to end the war as soon as possible. But he cannot end the war without something to show for it. And as we know, Mr. Trump likes to always have a win in any contest or any negotiation. But in this case, it will be difficult to extract a win from the Iranians. That you can say without a shadow of doubt that the U.S. In fact extracted concessions, huge concessions from Iran. But I believe that the war will end, and I believe that it won't take another 6 months or a year. I think it will be end before that. Because simply the world economy is going to
Great
go into
news. Great.
tailspin if it continues. And I'm sure that Washington is receiving many phone calls from leaders around the world saying, please stop this war, end this war. No. And also you see that the American people are by and large against the war. I think over 60%, around 60% are against the war. Many of them ask, why did we go to war? What was the purpose to go to war? What was the end game? Other than pressure from Israel and from Mr. Netanyahu. So I think it will end. I don't think it will take 6 months or a year. I think the Strait of Hormuz will be open. I somehow find it difficult to see the Iranian giving up the control of the Strait of Hormuz and not charging a toll for ships that transit the strait. I think that it has become very clear that they can, in fact, close the Strait of Hormuz. And they can also control other straits nearby. That's not the only strait they can. Of course, all the Arab Gulf states that are oil producing will try to accelerate their alternatives to be able to ship oil, like pipelines, oil pipelines, etc., to other places and not necessarily pass by the Strait of Hormuz to well, probably bypass the Strait of Hormuz.
To wrap things up, sir. I know we unfortunately can't talk forever, though there's a few more questions I'd like to get through to you. Do you think that because of this conflict, Iran is becoming more isolated globally, or is it integrating into an alternative political and economic network that perhaps is being created again through, China, Russia, BRICS, things like that? How do you think that politically this will play out for Iran in the longer term? More isolation or more integration to an alternative, I guess, alternative system and worldview, different from what we get from the United States and its Western allies.
I think that Iran is seen today by the um, global majority as the victim. So I do not believe that Iran would be isolated. Much to the contrary, I think that many, many countries will feel sympathy for Iran. Of course, the U.S. alliances may not think the same way, but due to the chaos that this war has caused, they are also revising their alignment with the U.S. So I think that Iran not only is going to be isolated, there will be more support for Iran going forward. The isolation will precisely be the opposite, will be U.S. and Israel. The world will see U.S. and Israel as the cause of this chaos, an unwarranted war with no objective for a simple reason to support Israeli expansionist policy.
I'm they're definitely, I guess, being exposed, and it's not the first time that they started an unwarranted war with the intent of regime change. We've had so many examples. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk to me today again, Mr. Lawrence Pih. And hopefully we can have a conversation soon. I'm actually very happy that you predict that the war will end soon and that the conflict will not escalate. And your knowledge and wisdom, you're like a walking encyclopedia, is just always welcome here. You know, you have an open invitation. And as soon as you have time, please come back and we can discuss all the troubles the world has. Unfortunately, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for being here.
Well, Italo, thank you very much for the invitation. And I'd like to commend you on your extremely challenging questions. Some of them were very difficult to answer. Thank you again.
It's very hard to challenge you, but I guess you bring out the best in other people's intellect as well because we try to get to your level. So I thank you as well, and hopefully we'll chat soon again.
Oh, certainly. Thank you.